I was cutting our 3-tiered wedding cake when my sister grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Sarah, where's Michael?" I looked around the reception hall filled with our 200 guests, all laughing and dancing under the twinkling lights, and realized I hadn't seen my husband in over an hour. The last time anyone remembered seeing him was during our first dance, when I finally found his tuxedo jacket crumpled in the bridal suite. There was a note in the pocket that made my blood run cold. 4 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about the man I just promised to love forever. I had no choice. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far this has reached. That morning started like every bride's dream. The September sun streamed through the windows of the bridal suite at the Rosewood Manor, casting everything in a golden glow that made even the dust particles look magical. I was surrounded by my 3 bridesmaids and my mother, all of us moving in that beautiful chaos that happens when women are getting ready for the most important day of their lives. My dress hung on the antique wardrobe like a work of art, ivory, silk with delicate beading that caught the light. Every time someone walked past, I'd found it at a tiny boutique in Charleston during my bachelorette trip, and the moment I saw it, I knew it was the one. Michael's reaction when I'd shown him the picture was worth every penny of the price tag. His eyes had actually welled up with tears. "You're going to take his breath away," my mother said, as she fastened her grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck, the same necklace she'd worn at her wedding 42 years ago, and her mother before her. Some traditions are worth keeping, and this felt like carrying all the love from the women in my family right there against my throat. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Michael. "Can't wait to see you at the altar. I love you more than words can say. Today we become forever." Each message made my heart flutter like I was still that college girl who'd spilled coffee on his textbook in the library 3 years. Goddard, the girls were already in their sage green dresses, each one perfectly fitted and elegant. My sister Emma, my maid of honor, kept checking her watch and updating me on everything happening downstairs. "The flowers look incredible, Sarah. The florist outdid herself with those white peonies. And Michael looks so handsome in his tux. I almost started crying when I saw him." I felt this overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over me. Everything was perfect. The venue we'd booked 18 months in advance. The band we'd auditioned 5 different groups to find. The menu we'd taste tested until we were sick of salmon and chicken. Every detail had fallen into place like pieces of a puzzle meant to create this one perfect day. But there was something I didn't know yet. Something that would make all these perfect details feel like props in a play I never auditioned for. Because the man waiting for me at that altar, the man who'd held my hand through every decision and laughed at my bridezilla moments, was carrying a secret that would change everything. The last message from Michael came at 2:47 p.m., just as I was having my final touch-ups. "You're about to marry your best friend, and I'm the luckiest man alive." I screenshot it, wanting to remember how happy I felt in that exact moment. I had no idea I'd be staring at those words hours later, trying to understand how someone could lie so beautifully. The moment I stepped into that chapel, I understood why we'd fallen in love with this venue. 200 white chairs lined the aisle, each decorated with a single white peony tied with sage ribbon. The altar was framed by 2 enormous arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus, and the late afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows painted everything in jewel tones. But none of that mattered the second I saw Michael standing at the altar. He was wearing the charcoal gray tuxedo we'd chosen together, the one that made his blue eyes look like sapphires. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he had that nervous smile I'd grown to love over 3 years. When our eyes met, I watched him mouth the words, "You're beautiful," and press his hand to his heart. My father squeezed my arm as we began the walk. "He's a lucky man, sweetheart," he whispered, and I felt tears threatening to ruin my makeup. Everything about this moment felt like a dream I'd been having since I was a little girl, playing dress-up in my mother's closet. The string quartet played our song, the same melody that had been playing in that coffee shop when Michael first asked me out. I'd requested it specifically because I wanted our love story to come full circle. Every step down that aisle felt like walking toward my future, toward the life we'd planned during those late-night conversations about kids and houses and growing old together. Michael's best man. Jake stood beside him looking unusually serious. They'd been friends since college, roommates for 2 years, and I'd expected him to be grinning ear to ear. Instead, he kept glancing toward the back of the chapel, his jaw tense. I made a mental note to ask Michael later if everything was okay between them. When I reached the altar, my father lifted my veil and kissed my cheek. "Take care of her," he told Michael, and Michael nodded solemnly. "With my life," he replied, taking my hands in his. His palms were sweating, which I thought was adorable. Even after 3 years together, I still made him nervous. The ceremony began with Reverend Matthews speaking about love and commitment, about the sacred bond we were about to enter. Michael's hands never stopped trembling in mine, and I kept giving him encouraging smiles. Poor thing was probably terrified of messing up his vows. We'd practiced them a dozen times, but he'd always been a perfectionist. "Do you, Michael James Patterson, take Sarah Elizabeth Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said, his voice strong and clear, and I felt my heart soar. "Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, take Michael James Patterson to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But what I didn't know was that Michael James Patterson wasn't even his real name. The man I was promising my life to had been lying about who he was since the day we met, and in just a few hours, that lie would come crashing down around both of us. The reception hall at Rosewood Manor was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Hundreds of string lights hung from the ceiling like stars, and every table was covered in crisp white linens with centerpieces of white peonies and candles. The band was already set up on the small stage, and the dance floor gleamed under the soft lighting. "Mrs. Patterson," Michael whispered in my ear as we walked in, and I laughed, still not used to hearing my new name. "I love the sound of that," I told him, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him. He spun me around, my dress billowing out like something from a movie, and our guests erupted in applause. The photographer was everywhere, capturing every moment. Our grand entrance, the way Michael's hand never left mine, the tears in my mother's eyes when she saw us dancing together for the first time as husband and wife. These were the moments I'd dreamed about since I was little, and they were even more perfect than I'd imagined. But there were things happening that I didn't notice in my wedding day bliss. Like how Jake kept checking his phone during the cocktail hour, his face growing more worried with each glance. Or how Michael excused himself 3 times before dinner, each time returning looking a little more pale than before. Or how there was a man in a dark suit near the bar who wasn't on our guest list, someone who kept watching our table with intense eyes. The first dance was to At Last by Etta James, the song that had been playing in the coffee shop when Michael told me he loved me for the first time. As he spun me slowly across the dance floor, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. "I can't believe you're really mine," he murmured against my hair, and I felt him tremble slightly. "Forever and always," I whispered back, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. After our dance, my father cut in and I watched Michael walk toward the bar. He was smiling and accepting congratulations from our guests, but something about his posture seemed different. Tenser, like he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. "He loves you very much," my father said as we swayed to the music. "I can see it in the way he looks at you, like you're the most precious thing in the world." I beamed, watching Michael shake hands with my Uncle Robert. "I'm so happy, Dad. I didn't know it was possible to feel this complete." But complete was the last thing Michael was feeling. Because while I was dancing with my father, lost in wedding day joy, my new husband was receiving a text message that would change everything. A message that said, "We know where you are. You have 2 hours." The dinner service began at 7 o'clock, and that's when I started noticing that something wasn't quite right. Michael was seated next to me at the head table, but he kept excusing himself. First, it was to check on the catering staff, then to make sure the bar was well stocked, then to speak with the band about the music schedule. "Where does he keep going?" my sister Emma asked, sliding into his empty chair during his 3rd absence. I laughed it off, but a small knot of worry was beginning to form in my stomach. "You know, Michael, he wants everything to be perfect. He's probably just making sure all the vendors are happy." But when I looked toward the bar where I'd last seen him, he wasn't there. Neither was Jake, his best man. I scanned the room, smiling and waving at guests who caught my eye, but my new husband was nowhere to be seen. That's when I noticed the man in the dark suit again. He was standing near the entrance to the hall, and he was definitely not one of our guests. I would have remembered him from the wedding planning, and he wasn't dressed like the venue staff. He was watching our table with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "do you know who that man is? By the entrance?" She followed my gaze and frowned. "I've never seen him before. Maybe he's with the venue security?" Before I could answer, Michael reappeared at my side. But he looked pale and his tuxedo shirt was slightly wrinkled, like he'd been running his hands through his hair. "Sorry, beautiful," he said, kissing my temple. "Just had to take care of some vendor issues. Is everything okay?" I asked, studying his face. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "Everything's perfect," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is the best day of my life." He sat down and took my hand, but I noticed his was shaking. Not the nervous trembles from the ceremony, but something deeper. Something that made my chest tighten with anxiety. The dinner continued with the usual wedding reception rhythm. Speeches from my father and Jake, though Jake's seemed unusually short and stilted. The cake cutting, where Michael's laugh sounded forced. The bouquet toss, where I turned around to see my new husband deep in conversation with that same mysterious man by the entrance. By the time the dancing began in earnest, Michael had disappeared again. This time, when I asked Jake where he'd gone, my new brother-in-law just shrugged and said, "You know Michael always has a million things on his mind." But that wasn't the Michael I knew. The Michael I'd fallen in love with was present and attentive. The Michael I'd married that morning would never leave me alone at our own wedding reception. Something was very, very wrong. I just didn't know yet that my husband of 6 hours was upstairs in the bridal suite, frantically packing a bag while tears streamed down his face. Or that the note he was writing would be the last communication I'd have with him for months. The evening was winding down beautifully. The band was playing slower songs now, and couples swayed together on the dance floor under those twinkling lights. I was chatting with my college roommate about her recent engagement when Emma appeared at my elbow, her face creased with concern. "Sarah, when's the last time you saw Michael?" I paused, mentally reviewing the last hour. We were... The realization hit me like a cold wave. I couldn't remember seeing him since the cake cutting, and that had been over an hour ago. "I'm sure he's just..." I started. But Emma was already scanning the room with sharp eyes. "Jake's gone too," she said. I asked Mom if she'd seen either of them, and she said not for at least an hour. A flutter of panic started in my chest. This wasn't like Michael. Even if he'd gotten food poisoning or suddenly felt sick, he would have told me. He wouldn't just vanish from our own wedding reception without a word. I started making the rounds, trying to look casual while asking if anyone had seen my husband. The responses were all variations of the same thing. "Not recently. Maybe an hour ago. I thought he was with you." By the time I'd asked a dozen people, my panic was full-blown. Where could he have gone? And why would he leave without telling me? On our wedding night, no less. "Maybe he's in the bathroom," suggested my cousin Lisa, but I'd already checked. The men's restroom was empty except for my elderly great-uncle washing his hands. "Could he be outside getting some air?" asked my Aunt Carol, and I practically ran to the terrace. But the only people out there were 3 of Michael's co-workers smoking cigars and talking about football. Emma grabbed my arm. "Sarah, let's check the bridal suite. Maybe he went up there to fix his tie or something." The bridal suite was on the 2nd floor of the manor, accessible by a winding staircase that creaked under our heels. As we climbed, I tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe he'd torn his shirt. Maybe he'd spilled something. Maybe he was planning some sort of surprise for me. But when Emma turned the antique doorknob and we stepped into the room, all those hopeful theories crumbled. The suite was in chaos. Drawers were pulled open, clothes were scattered across the floor, and my beautiful bridal room looked like it had been ransacked. "What the hell?" Emma breathed, and that's when I saw it. Michael's tuxedo jacket was crumpled on the floor beside the antique dresser, the jacket he'd been wearing just hours ago when he'd promised to love me forever. It was lying there like he'd ripped it off in a hurry, like he couldn't get out of it fast enough. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. It still smelled like his cologne, like the man I'd just married, and that's when I felt the weight in the inside pocket, the weight of a piece of paper that would change my life forever. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold the piece of paper. It was hotel stationery, the elegant cream-colored paper with the Rosewood Manor letterhead that we'd thought was so classy when we'd booked the venue, but now it felt like it was burning my fingers. Emma stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder, as I read the words that shattered my world. Sarah, I'm so sorry. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. There are things about me you don't know. Things I should have told you before we walked down that aisle. I thought I could keep you safe by staying silent, but I was wrong. I had no choice but to leave. Don't try to find me. This is the only way to protect you. I love you more than life itself, but love isn't enough to fix what I've done. Check the safe deposit box at First National. Box 847. The key is taped under the jewelry box on the dresser. I'm sorry I couldn't be the man you deserved. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to make sense. But they just floated on the page like hieroglyphs in a foreign language. Sarah? Emma's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. What does it say? I handed her the note with numb fingers and walked to the dresser on unsteady legs. Sure enough, there was a small silver key taped to the bottom of my grandmother's jewelry box, the one I'd been storing my wedding earrings in just that morning. This has to be a joke, Emma said after reading the note. Some kind of elaborate prank. Michael would never... But I knew it wasn't a joke. The handwriting was definitely his, the same careful script I'd watched him use to address our wedding invitations. And the chaos in the room told a story of panic and desperation, not careful planning for a prank. Things about him I don't know, I whispered, sinking onto the bed where I'd gotten ready just hours ago. What things? We've been together for 3 years. We live together. We share everything. But even as I said it, little moments started floating back to me. How Michael never talked about his childhood or his family. How he'd always changed the subject when I'd asked about his parents or siblings. How he'd told me they'd died in a car accident when he was 18, but he'd never once shown me photos or told me stories about them. How he always paid in cash for big purchases. How he'd been evasive about his job, just saying he worked in security consulting, but never giving details. How he'd received strange phone calls that he'd always taken in another room. Emma, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't think I know who I married. She sat beside me on the bed, her arm around my shoulders. Sarah, honey, you're in shock. People don't just disappear on their wedding night. There has to be an explanation. But I was already thinking about the safe deposit box, about what secrets could be so terrible that they'd make a man abandon his new wife on their wedding night, about what kind of danger Michael thought I was in. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible thought was forming. What if the man I'd just married, the man I'd given my heart to completely, wasn't who he claimed to be at all? We had to go back downstairs. I couldn't hide in the bridal suite forever, and 180 guests were still celebrating what they thought was my happily ever after. Emma helped me fix my makeup and smooth my hair, but there was no hiding the shock in my eyes. What are you going to tell everyone? She asked as we paused at the top of the staircase. I had no idea. How do you explain that your husband has vanished into thin air? How do you tell your wedding guests that the groom has fled with nothing but a cryptic note about secrets and danger? I'll think of something, I said, but my voice was hollow. The band was still playing when we walked back into the reception hall. Most of our guests were starting to wind down, and some of the older relatives were already saying their goodbyes. But there were still plenty of people dancing and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that half the couple they'd come to celebrate was gone. My mother spotted me first. There you are, darling. Where have you been? And where's Michael? People are asking about the final dance. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could I tell my mother that her new son-in-law had abandoned me on our wedding night? He's not feeling well. Emma jumped in smoothly. Food poisoning, we think. He's upstairs resting. It was a good cover story, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. People would want to say goodbye, to check on him. And what about our honeymoon flight tomorrow morning? What about the life we'd planned? My father approached with Michael's Uncle Robert, both of them holding glasses of whiskey and looking concerned. Is Michael all right? Robert here was hoping to catch him before we leave. I started, then felt tears threatening again. He's resting upstairs. Stomach bug. Uncle Robert frowned. That's strange. I was just talking to Jake and he said Michael stepped out to take a phone call. Said he'd be right back, but that was 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago. So Jake knew something. I scanned the room for Michael's best man and spotted him by the bar, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he avoided eye contact with everyone. Excuse me, I said, lifting my dress and marching across the dance floor with determination I didn't feel. Jake saw me coming and his face went pale. He tried to slip away toward the exit, but I caught his arm. Where is he, Jake? Sarah, don't lie to me. Uncle Robert says you were the last person to see him. Where did he go? Jake looked around desperately, like he was hoping someone would rescue him. I can't. Sarah, I'm sorry. I really can't say anything. Can't or won't. My voice was rising, and people were starting to notice. Jake, I just found his jacket on the floor upstairs and a note saying he's gone. Gone, Jake, on our wedding night. So whatever loyalty you think you owe him, I need to know what's happening. Jake's shoulders sagged in defeat. He got a phone call around 9 o'clock. Someone had found him. After 3 years of looking, they'd finally tracked him down. Who? Found him for what? Sarah, the man you married. His name isn't really Michael Patterson. The reception hall suddenly felt like it was spinning. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses all became a distant roar as Jake's words hit me like a physical blow. Then who is he? Jake looked around one more time, then leaned closer. His real name is Marcus Thompson, and there are people who want him dead. Jake's words hit me like a physical blow. The reception continued around us, guests laughing and dancing, completely unaware that my entire world was collapsing. I gripped his arm tighter, my nails digging into his jacket. What do you mean people want him dead? Jake, you need to tell me everything. Right now. He glanced around nervously, then took my elbow and guided me to a quieter corner near the back of the hall. Emma followed us, her face tight with worry. 3 years ago, Jake began, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus witnessed something he shouldn't have. A murder. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he saw a prominent businessman kill his business partner in a parking garage downtown. My legs felt weak. What businessman? Vincent Carlisle. You might have heard of him. Owns half the commercial real estate in the city. Runs in political circles. But he's also connected to some very dangerous people. When Marcus testified against him, Carlisle's associates made it clear that testifying was signing his own death warrant. The room was spinning. My husband, Marcus, whoever he was, had been living under a false identity for 3 years. Our entire relationship was built on a lie. So he entered witness protection? Emma asked. Jake shook his head. He was supposed to. The FBI set it up, a new identity, under a location to another state, but then he met Sarah. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. He was supposed to move to Oregon and become a completely different person. Instead, he stayed here and became Michael Patterson. Because of me. The words came out as a croak. He fell in love with you that first day in the coffee shop. Called me that night. Said he'd met the woman he was going to marry. But he was also terrified because staying meant putting you in danger. I thought about all those times Michael had insisted on walking me to my car after dark. How he'd installed a security system in our apartment that seemed excessive. How he'd always known if someone was following us, or if something felt off about a situation. The phone call tonight. I managed. Who was it? Jake's face went ashen. Someone sent him a photo. A picture of you walking into the bridal suite earlier today. The message said they knew where he was and that they were done waiting. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Someone had been watching me, photographing me on my wedding day. Someone who wanted to hurt the man I loved. So he just left. Anger was starting to mix with the shock. He just abandoned me instead of trusting me with the truth. Sarah, you have to understand. These people don't just kill the person they're after. They kill families, friends, anyone who might be a witness or a liability. Marcus's leaving was his way of protecting you. But I'm still in danger, aren't I? I said, the realization hitting me like a truck. If they know about me, if they've been watching... Jake couldn't meet my eyes. He hopes that with him gone, they'll follow him and leave you alone. That you'll be safe as long as you're not with him. Emma grabbed my arm. Sarah, we need to call the police. No, Jake said sharply. Marcus specifically said no police. There might be corruption, people on Carlisle's payroll, The only reason he stayed alive this long was by staying off the radar completely. I felt like I was drowning. The man I'd just married was a stranger. Our entire relationship was built on lies, and now he was gone, disappeared into the night to protect me from people who wanted him dead. But there was one thing Jake had said that stuck with me. The safe deposit box. He mentioned a safe deposit box in the note. Jake nodded grimly. He said if anything ever happened, if he had to run, that everything you needed to know would be there. I looked around the reception hall one more time. My parents are laughing with my aunts and uncles. At my college friends are taking pictures with their phones at the life I'd thought I was stepping into just hours ago. I need to get out of here, I whispered. I need to see what's in that box. The next morning, I sat in my car outside First National Bank, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, trying to process the fact that my husband had vanished, and my marriage was apparently built on lies. Emma was beside me, equally exhausted. We'd managed to get through the rest of the reception by telling everyone that Michael had come down with severe food poisoning and had to be rushed home. People were disappointed but understanding. No one suspected that the groom had actually fled into the night. You don't have to do this today, Emma said softly. We could wait, process everything first. But I needed answers. I needed to understand who I'd married and why he'd left me. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, was sympathetic when I explained that I needed to access my husband's safe deposit box due to a family emergency. The death certificate story Emma had coached me on wasn't necessary. Apparently, being a spouse was enough, especially when I had the key and could provide identification. My hands shook as I inserted the key into box 847. Mrs. Chen discreetly left me alone in the small viewing room, and I took a deep breath before lifting the metal lid. The box contained more than I'd expected. Stacks of cash, at least $20,000 in neat bundles. Several passports, each with Michael's photo, but different names. Marcus Thompson, David Mitchell, James Morrison. And underneath it all, a thick manila envelope with my name written on the front in his careful handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, legal documents, and a letter that was much longer than the note he'd left at the hotel. The photographs made my blood run cold. They were surveillance photos of me, pictures of me leaving work, walking to my car, and entering our apartment building. Some were dated from just a week ago. Someone had been watching me for months, maybe longer. The legal documents were from the FBI. Witness protection paperwork with Marcus Thompson's real information. Birth certificate, social security number, employment history, all for a man I'd never heard of until yesterday. But it was the letter that broke my heart completely. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and I've had to leave you to keep you safe. I know you must hate me right now, and you have every right to. I've lied to you about everything except one thing. I love you more than life itself. My vision blurred with tears as I continued reading. My real name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 29 years old, originally from Detroit. 3 years ago, I witnessed Vincent Carlisle murder his business partner, Thomas Reeves, in the parking garage of the Riverside office complex. I was working late that night, delivering security equipment to a client, when I saw it happen. Carlisle shot Reeves 3 times in the chest, then made a phone call to have the body disposed of. The letter went on to describe the trial, the threats, and the FBI's offer of witness protection. And then the moment that changed everything. I was supposed to leave the city on September 15th, 2021. New identity, new location, new life. But on September 12th, I walked into Morrison's coffee shop to get one last cup of their hazelnut blend before I disappeared forever. And then you spilled coffee on my laptop and apologized so sweetly, and I knew my life was over. I remembered that day perfectly. I'd been rushing to meet a client and hadn't been watching where I was going. This gorgeous man with kind blue eyes had been so understanding about his ruined laptop, and when he'd asked me to dinner to make up for it, I'd said yes without hesitation. I told myself I'd go on 1 date with you and then disappear, but 1 date became 2, then 5. Then I was in love with you, and couldn't imagine a life without you in it. I knew I was being selfish, I knew I was putting you in danger, but I thought if I was careful enough, if I stayed alert enough, I could keep you safe and still have you." The letter continued for several more pages, detailing how he'd created the Michael Patterson identity, how he'd gotten fake documents, and how he'd lived in constant fear for 3 years while trying to build a normal life with me. "Every day I didn't tell you the truth was another day I failed you," he wrote, "but I was terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd leave. And I was even more terrified that if you stayed, they'd hurt you to get to me." The final section of Marcus's letter contained information that made my hands shake so badly I could barely hold the paper. "Sarah, there are things you need to know now that I'm gone. Vincent Carlisle was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but his associates are still active. The man who's been hunting me is named Anton Volkov, Carlisle's former business partner and enforcer. He's the one who's been sending the surveillance photos and making the threats." I flipped through more of the photographs in the box. They weren't just recent. Some were dated from over a year ago. This Volkov person had been watching me, learning my routines, documenting my life for months. The FBI contact I've been working with is Agent Jennifer Walsh. Her direct number is in this envelope. If you're ever in immediate danger, call her first, then 911. She knows everything about my situation and has been helping me stay hidden. My husband had been hiding for 3 years, and I'd never known. All those times he'd seemed jumpy or paranoid, all those security measures that had seemed excessive, he'd been protecting both of us from a man who wanted him dead. Emma was reading over my shoulder, her face growing paler with each revelation. "Sarah, this is insane. You've been living with a man in witness protection, and you never knew?" I thought about all the little things that made sense now. How Michael never wanted to go to crowded events where photos might be taken. How he'd always insisted on sitting with his back to the wall in restaurants. How he'd known self-defense techniques that seemed too advanced for someone who claimed to have learned them at a community center. The letter continued. "I've left money in this box because I don't know if you'll be able to access our joint accounts. Volkov has resources, and he might freeze assets or cause problems for you financially. There's enough here to disappear if you need to start over somewhere safe." Start over. The phrase hit me like a slap. I was supposed to be starting over as Mrs. Michael Patterson, beginning our married life together. Instead, I was reading instructions on how to disappear from my own life. "If you choose to look for me, please don't. I'll be moving constantly, never staying anywhere long enough to be tracked. The only way I can live with leaving you is knowing that you're safe. If we're together, we're both dead." The finality of those words broke something inside me. He wasn't planning to come back. This wasn't a temporary separation until things cooled down. Marcus, Michael, whoever he was gone forever. But there was a postscript that gave me a tiny sliver of hope. "There's one more thing, my love. Every year on September 12th, the anniversary of the day we met, I'll send a single white peony to your mother's house. No card, no message. Just so you know I'm still alive and that I still love you. If the flowers ever stop coming, you'll know I'm gone for real." I set the letter down and stared at the contents of the safe deposit box. $20,000 in cash, multiple fake identities, FBI contact information, and the truth about the man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked quietly. I didn't know. How do you process learning that your entire relationship was built on a necessary lie? How do you move forward when the person you love has vanished to protect you from people who want to kill him? I called Agent Walsh from the bank's parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly that Emma had to dial the number for me. When a crisp, professional voice answered, I almost hung up. "Agent Walsh, this is Sarah Morrison. My husband is Marcus Thompson." There was a long pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Mrs. Patterson, where are you right now?" "I'm at First National Bank. I just opened his safe deposit box." "Don't move. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere you normally go. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, and I stared at the phone in confusion. "Don't go home?" What did that mean? Agent Walsh arrived in exactly 18 minutes, driving an unmarked black sedan. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with short auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a navy blue suit that looked both professional and practical, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm and reassuring. Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Marcus spoke about you often. He spoke about me? To you? She nodded, guiding Emma and me to a quieter corner of the parking lot. Every check-in, every security briefing, you were his whole world. Leaving you was the hardest thing he's ever done. Then why didn't he trust me with the truth? 3 years, Agent Walsh. 3 years of lies. Her expression softened slightly. Because he loved you too much to put you in danger. And because, frankly, the less you knew, the safer you were. Until now. What do you mean until now? Agent Walsh's face was grim. Anton Volkov escalated his search when he realized Marcus was serious about disappearing permanently. The wedding was too public. Too many photos that could be analyzed. Too many people who could be questioned. Volkov's people were at your reception. The blood drained from my face. What? We identified 3 of his associates in the photos our surveillance team took. They were posing as guests, but they were armed and watching for an opportunity to take Marcus. Emma grabbed my arm. Sarah, that man you noticed by the entrance, probably one of them. Agent Walsh confirmed. Marcus spotted them during the cake cutting. That's when he made the decision to run. I felt sick. My perfect wedding day had been infiltrated by killers. People who wanted to murder my husband had been watching me dance, watching me smile, waiting for their chance. So what happens now? I asked, am I safe? Agent Walsh hesitated, which wasn't the reassuring response I'd been hoping for. Volkov's primary target was Marcus. With him gone, you should be less of a priority. But Volkov might try to use you as leverage to draw Marcus out. He knows Marcus loves you, and knows he might come back if you're threatened. The parking lot suddenly felt too exposed, too open. I found myself scanning the area for suspicious cars, for people who might be watching us. Was this what Marcus had lived with for 3 years? This constant fear? This inability to feel safe anywhere? I can offer you protection, Agent Walsh continued. Safe house, new identity if necessary, but it would mean giving up your life here. Your job, your family. I looked at Emma, at my sister who'd been my rock through everything. The thought of disappearing, of never seeing her or my parents again, was almost unbearable. There's another option, Agent Walsh said carefully. We could use you as bait. Absolutely not, Emma said immediately. Sarah is not going to be anyone's bait, but I was already thinking about it. What do you mean exactly? Agent Walsh glanced around the parking lot, then motioned for us to get into her car. We've been trying to catch Volkov for years. He's careful, paranoid, and never stays in one place long enough for us to track him down. But his obsession with Marcus could be his weakness. You want to use me to draw him out, I said. The theory is that if Volkov believes you might lead him to Marcus, he'll take risks he wouldn't normally take. We'd wire you, monitor you constantly, and when he makes his move, we'd be ready. And if something goes wrong? Emma demanded. If your plan fails and this psychopath gets his hands on Sarah? Agent Walsh's expression was serious. I won't lie to you. It would be dangerous, but it might also be the only way to end this permanently. As long as Volkov is out there, Marcus can never come home. You'll never be completely safe. Come home. The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Marcus. I still couldn't think of him as Michael. Not anymore. Constantly running, constantly looking over his shoulder, never able to settle anywhere or build a life. How long would I have to think about it? Not long. Volkov will realize soon enough that Marcus is gone. If we're going to do this, it needs to be within the next few days, while he's still hoping you might lead him to his target. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. 48 hours ago, I'd been a bride getting ready for the happiest day of my life. Now I was being asked to risk my life to catch a killer and, maybe, have a chance at getting my husband back. What does Marcus think about this plan? I asked. He doesn't know about it. We lost contact with him yesterday evening, which was always the plan. He's completely off-grid now, part 12 or 13, so I'd be making this decision alone, without knowing what Marcus would want, without being able to ask him if our love was worth the risk. I need to ask you something, I said to Agent Walsh. If we catch Volkov, if this works, does Marcus get to come home? Do we get to have a life together? Agent Walsh was quiet for a long moment. If Volkov and his remaining associates are neutralized, yes. Marcus could reclaim his real identity. You could be together. And if we don't try this, then he stays hidden forever, and you try to build a new life without him. The choice was impossible. Risk everything for a chance at the life we'd planned, or accept that the man I loved was gone forever. Emma took my hand. Sarah, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But you need to really think about this. Is he worth risking your life for? I thought about Marcus reading his vows to me just 2 days ago, promising to love me forever. I thought about all the times he'd held me during nightmares, all the mornings I'd woken up in his arms feeling completely safe and loved. I thought about the letter in that safe deposit box, about how leaving me had broken his heart as much as it had broken mine. Yes, I said quietly, he's worth it. Agent Walsh explained the plan over coffee at a diner 30 minutes outside the city. She'd chosen a place where she could watch all the entrances, and I noticed her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. This level of vigilance was going to be my new reality. We'll set you up to return to your normal routine, she began, sliding a small device across the table. It looked like a regular button, the kind you'd find on a coat. This is a GPS tracker and panic button combined. Press and hold for 3 seconds, and our response team will know your exact location and that you're in trouble. I turned the button over in my fingers. It was so small, so ordinary looking. It was hard to believe something so simple might be the difference between life and death. You'll go back to work tomorrow. Live in your apartment. Act like you're trying to move on with your life after your husband's disappearance. We'll have agents watching you at all times, but they'll be invisible. What about my family? Emma, my parents? They need to know enough to stay alert, but not so much that they act differently. Volkov's people are trained to spot unusual behavior. Emma shifted uncomfortably. This feels like a nightmare. Agent Walsh's expression was sympathetic. It is a nightmare, but it's the only way out of the maze Marcus has been trapped in for 3 years. She showed me photographs of Anton Volkov and his known associates. Volkov was a thin, sharp-featured man in his 50s with pale eyes and graying hair. He looked like someone's accountant, not a killer. The ordinariness of his appearance was somehow more frightening than if he'd looked like a movie villain. He's brilliant, Agent Walsh explained. Former military intelligence, speaks 6 languages, has contacts all over the world. He's survived this long because he's patient and careful. But Marcus is his white whale. He's been hunting him for 3 years, and it's become personal. Why? I mean, beyond just revenge for the testimony. Volkov was Carlyle's partner in more than just the legitimate business. When Carlyle went to prison, Volkov lost millions of dollars in frozen assets and abandoned operations. In his mind, Marcus didn't just send his partner to jail, he destroyed his entire empire. The waitress refilled our coffee cups, and I watched Agent Walsh's hand move instinctively closer to her jacket. Even getting coffee was a tactical situation for these people. What's the timeline? I asked. We'll monitor all your communications, all your activities. If Volkov takes the bait, it'll probably be within a week. He's been watching you for months. He knows your routines, your relationships, your vulnerabilities. He'll choose his moment carefully. And when he does, he'll either try to grab you for information or follow you hoping you'll lead him to Marcus. Either way, we'll be ready. I thought about going back to my apartment tonight, to the home I'd shared with Marcus for 2 years. All his clothes were still there, his books, his coffee mug that he used every morning. How was I supposed to act normal when everything in that space would remind me of the life we'd built on a foundation of necessary lies? Agent Walsh, I said, can I ask you something personal? Do you think he really loves me, or was I just part of his cover? She was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Mrs. Patterson, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've worked with dozens of people in witness protection. I've never seen anyone struggle with a decision the way Marcus struggled with leaving you. He asked me at least 50 times if there was any other way, any possibility of keeping you safe without disappearing. But he still left. Because staying would have gotten you killed, and he knew that if something happened to you because of him, he'd never forgive himself. As we drove back toward the city, I stared out the window at the normal world going by. People driving to work, walking their dogs, living their regular lives without looking over their shoulders or wondering if someone was planning to kill them. In 24 hours, I would become bait for a killer. It was possibly the most terrifying thing I'd ever agreed to do. It was also the only chance I had of getting my husband back. The next morning, I went back to work at the marketing firm where I'd been employed for 2 years. Everyone was incredibly sympathetic about Michael's sudden illness and disappearance. My boss, Linda, had sent flowers and told me to take as much time as I needed. "Food poisoning can be so serious," she said, putting a concerned hand on my shoulder. "And on your wedding night? How is he feeling now?" "Better," I lied, sitting at my desk and trying to act like my world hadn't completely collapsed. "Still recovering, but better." The FBI button was sewn into the lining of my jacket, and I found myself touching it unconsciously throughout the day. Agent Walsh had said there would be agents nearby at all times, but I couldn't spot them. That was probably the point. My phone rang constantly, friends and family checking on Michael, vendors asking about final payments for the wedding, the hotel calling about our honeymoon suite that we'd obviously never used. Each conversation was another small lie, another piece of the fabricated story I had to maintain. Emma stopped by during lunch, bringing soup from our favorite deli. "How are you holding up?" "I keep expecting him to walk through the door," I said honestly. "I keep thinking this is all some terrible mistake, and he'll come home tonight with flowers and an explanation that makes everything okay. Have you heard anything from Agent Walsh?" I shook my head. She said no news is good news at this point. It means Volkov hasn't made his move yet. But that afternoon, things changed. I was in a client meeting when my assistant knocked and said I had an urgent phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, slightly accented, and made my blood turn to ice. "Mrs. Patterson, my name is Anton. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." My hand immediately went to the button in my jacket. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "I think you know who this is. I also think you know where your husband has gone." I signaled to Emma, who was still in my office, and she immediately started moving toward the door. Agent Walsh had given her a number to call if anything happened. "My husband is sick," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's been home with food poisoning since our wedding." Volkov chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Please, Mrs. Patterson, we both know that Marcus isn't at home. We both know he ran like a coward, leaving his new bride to face the consequences." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Meet me tonight. 8 o'clock. The parking garage where this all started. Riverside Office Complex, level B2. Come alone, and we'll discuss where your husband might have gone." The line went dead. I sat staring at the phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. This was it. This was the moment Agent Walsh had been preparing me for. But knowing it was coming and actually living it were two completely different things. Emma rushed back into my office. "Agent Walsh is on her way. Sarah, you don't have to do this. We can call it off right now." I thought about Marcus wherever he was, probably in some cheap motel, scared and alone, thinking he'd never see me again. I thought about Agent Walsh saying this might be our only chance to end it permanently. And I thought about the alternative, living the rest of my life knowing that the man I loved was out there somewhere, running from shadows, never able to come home. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm going to meet him." At 7:45 p.m., I drove into the Riverside Office Complex parking garage. Agent Walsh and her team were positioned throughout the area, but I felt completely alone as I descended to level B2. The concrete walls seemed to close in around me, and every shadow looked like it might hide someone waiting to hurt me. I parked in the spot Volkov had specified and turned off the engine. The garage was eerily quiet, lit only by a few scattered fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows everywhere. At exactly 8 o'clock, a figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar. Anton Volkov looked exactly like his photograph. Ordinary, forgettable, the kind of man you wouldn't notice on the street. But his eyes were... I rolled down the window, my hand resting on the panic button in my jacket. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you for coming. What do you want?" I tried to sound braver than I felt. "I want Marcus Thompson, and you're going to help me find him. I told you, I don't know where he is. He disappeared on our wedding night. I haven't heard from him since." Volkov smiled, and it was one of the most frightening expressions I'd ever seen. "Of course you have. Love makes people do foolish things. Check in with their wives, send reassuring messages. Marcus is too sentimental to just vanish completely." "You're wrong." "Am I?" He pulled out a phone and showed me a photograph. It was a picture of me from that morning, walking into my office building. "I've been watching you, Mrs. Patterson. Every call you make, every person you meet with. And this afternoon you received a very interesting visitor." My blood ran cold. He'd seen Agent Walsh. "So either you're working with the FBI to try to catch me, or they're using you as bait to draw me out. Either way, Marcus will come for you." That's when I realized the fatal flaw in our plan. Volkov was too smart to fall for it. He'd known it was a trap from the beginning. "He's not coming," I said. "Even if he knew I was here, he wouldn't risk it. That's why he left in the first place. We'll see." Volkov pulled out a gun, keeping it low but pointed at me. "Get out of the car, Mrs. Patterson. We're going to take a little drive." This was the moment. I pressed the panic button and held it for 3 seconds, praying that Agent Walsh and her team were in position. But as I started to get out of the car, another voice echoed through the garage. "Let her go. Anton." Marcus stepped out from behind a pillar 20 feet away. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, tired and worn down, but his eyes were blazing with determination. "Marcus," Volkov said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "I knew you'd come. I'm here. Let Sarah walk away and you can have me." "No," I shouted. "Marcus, don't!" But he wasn't looking at me anymore. His attention was completely focused on Volkov, and I could see the 3 years of fear and running in his posture, the weight of constantly looking over his shoulder. "You've cost me everything," Volkov said to Marcus. "My partner, my business, my reputation. Did you really think you could hide forever?" "I hoped I could," Marcus said quietly. "But I couldn't let you hurt her." That's when the FBI moved in. Agent Walsh and her team appeared from positions throughout the garage, surrounding Volkov with weapons drawn. He spun around, realizing he was trapped, but he still had his gun pointed at me. "Drop your weapon," Agent Walsh shouted. For a moment, everything was frozen. Volkov's hand was shaking, his eyes darting between the FBI agents, Marcus and me. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if he could take one of us with him. Then Marcus did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He stepped forward, putting himself directly in Volkov's line of fire. "It's over, Anton. You got what you wanted. I'm here." Volkov's attention shifted to Marcus, and in that split second, Agent Walsh took the shot. Volkov crumpled to the concrete floor, his gun clattering away harmlessly. And then Marcus was running toward me, and I was running toward him. And we crashed into each other's arms in the middle of that cold, harsh garage like we were the only 2 people left in the world. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my hair, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry for everything. Are you okay?" I pulled back to look at him, to make sure he was real and whole and safe. "I am now." Agent Walsh approached us, holstering her weapon. "It's over." Volkov's associates were arrested simultaneously in 3 different cities. "Marcus, you're free to reclaim your life." Free. The word hung in the air like a prayer answered. 6 months later, Marcus and I had our real wedding. A small ceremony with just our families, where he used his real name and told the truth about everything. Agent Walsh was there, along with Jake, who cried during the entire ceremony. We decided to keep both names. He's legally Marcus Thompson again, but some of our friends still call him Michael. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we're together and safe, and building the life we dreamed about during those stolen moments when he thought we might never have a future. Sometimes I think about that night in the parking garage, about how close I came to losing him forever. But mostly I think about how love really can conquer anything, even when it requires the kind of courage I never knew I had. The story you've just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. But the love, the fear, the impossible choices, those were all real. I want to ask you, if the person you loved most in the world had to choose between their safety and yours, what would you want them to do? Would you rather live with the truth and the danger, or with the lies and the safety? Tell me in the comments what you think. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust someone enough to let them protect you, even when that protection breaks both your hearts. God bless.